It is the most politically charged World Cup in recent memory. Russia, resurgent under Vladimir Putin, is set to host the 32-team tournament next month amid scandals ranging from sports doping to spy poisonings. Relations between Moscow and London are at their coolest since the Cold War, and the recent events in Salisbury even led to brief speculation, aided by Boris Johnson, that England could skip the tournament, recalling the Olympics boycotts of the 1980s. While individual matches such as the United States and Iran's face-off in 1998 were political lightning rods in their time, the host country has not faced such heated criticism perhaps since the 1978 World Cup in Argentina, held just 2 years after a right-wing military coup backed by the United States. Last week, Human Rights Watch released a 44-page guide detailing repression and discrimination in Russia, targeted at the thousands of journalists expected to arrive in the country for the tournament. FIFA still has time to show that it is ready to use its leverage with the Russian government to fulfill its own human rights policies, Hugh Williamson of Human Rights Watch said in a statement. Russia's aspirations have changed since it was awarded the World Cup back in 2010. Then, it still appeared set on wooing the international community by holding prestige tournaments. Dmitry Medvedev was president, and the reset in relations initiated by President Obama was still on track, with the goal of repairing relations after the war in Georgia. But even then, long before Salisbury, the war in Ukraine, laws against gay propaganda, and hooligan violence in Marseille, racist incidents in Russian football were a clear concern. FIFA President Sepp Blatter and Putin during the handover ceremony for the 2018 World Cup. Photographed RIA Novosti, Reuters. Russian officials, as well as some players and journalists, insist that while the country has a problem with right-wing fans, the situation has been blown out of proportion by the press and is no worse than elsewhere in Eastern Europe. The government says it has made advances in anti-racism monitoring at matches. Data from independent organizations appears to support that conclusion. Both monkey chants heard at 3 matches since March. The spotlight will remain on the hooligan culture, largely modeled on English fans, that has grown around post-Soviet football. A critical moment in that history came just 4 days after Russia was awarded the World Cup in 2010, when a Spartak Moscow fan named Igor Spiritiv was killed by a rubber bullet during a brawl that pitted young, ethnically Russian football fans against youths from the country's North Caucasus. The release of the suspected killer, Aslan Cherkasov, angered nationalists. Within days, thousands of football hooligans and far-right groups were rioting on Benez Square, beside the Kremlin, in nationalist-tinged protests that took nearly everyone by surprise. Vladimir Putin laid flowers at Spiritov's grave later that month in what was interpreted as a sign of deference to nationalists. It was one of the showcase events where everyone saw the numbers, the power the fans have, and the prevalence of the far-right ideology among the fans, said Pavel Klimenko, who helps monitor instances of fan discrimination for the Football Against Racism in Europe FAIR network. There was a political importance too. Putin did not condemn them. He gave in to some of the xenophobic demands of the fans. His concern was for the fans not to turn against him. The following years saw a number of ugly incidents. Several black players, including Emmanuel Frimpong and Christopher Samba, were punished by the Russian Football Union after reacting to racist slurs hurled by fans. Ultras in St. Petersburg in 2012 released a manifesto demanding their team refuse to sign non-white and gay players. And CSKA Moscow were forced to play 2 games in an empty stadium after hooligans set off flares and unfurled racist banners during a Champions League fixture against Roma in 2014. The ban was the point of no return for Robert Busian, a 34-year-old political analyst and CSKA fan, who founded a group called CSKA Fans Against Racism. The volunteer organization seeks to change the club's fan culture through better education and self-policing, and Eustian believes it has helped reduce racist behavior at matches. He helps to organize monitoring of extremist slogans and banners, including swastikas, at matches. He has received threats, he said. Many other volunteers choose to remain anonymous. Somebody has to stand up and raise his voice against this, he said. Russian football has taken some important steps to combat racism, Klimenko said, including the appointment of the retired Chelsea and Fulham midfielder Alexei Smirtin as a dedicated envoy against discrimination in Russian football, and improved monitoring at matches. In contrast, the government in 2013 passed new legislation outlawing gay propaganda, including gay pride parades or support groups for young people, which led to an upsurge in homophobic attacks. The new laws were a source of controversy before the 2014 Sochi Olympics, and Klimenko said that homophobic language has been used at Russian football stadiums this season, but little has been done to combat it. Homosexuality is such a taboo in Russian society that nobody really dares to address it, he said. Of criticism over race incidents, Igor Rabiner, one of the country's best-known football writers, said, "Sometimes it's fair, sometimes it's much exaggerated. Much work has been done to stop it, but you couldn't eliminate it all. First, it takes time. Second, football just reflects what happens in society in general." In a report in 2015, FAIR and the Anti-Extremist Sova Center in Moscow documented 99 racist and far-right displays and 21 racially motivated attacks by fans during the 2012-13 and 2013-14 seasons. In a report to be released this week, Klimenko said FAIR will announce a reduced incidence of racist symbols at matches, continuing a trend over the past several years. He said incidents of recorded racist slogans, such as monkey chants, have risen, but that is likely due to the increased monitoring at matches. But incidents have still come at critical moments. In March, France's Ousmane Dembélé, N'Golo Kanté and Paul Pogba were targeted with monkey chants during a friendly in St. Petersburg. FIFA this month fined the Russian Football Union more than £22,000 for the incident. Klimenko said the audience for that match would likely reflect that for the World Cup. The problem is that young people come and see the dominance of the far-right chants, and anyone who tries to challenge has a significant threat of violence, he said. They're soaking in the culture around them. At the Russian Cup final in Volgograd this month, officials said violent fan behavior would not be tolerated. Andrei Bocharov, the region's governor, said that all measures necessary are being taken to protect fans, including banning fans known for violent or racist behavior from the stadiums. Most attention appears focused on preventing fan violence or a terrorist attack. During the match, streets and public transport were blocked off for kilometers around Volgograd Stadium. Hanging out at the game were players from Germany's under-18 squad. "They've all wanted to take pictures with us," German defender Jan Orlbisic, who is black, said, adding that many Russians around town even recognized him. That had followed an emotional game against the Russian under-18 squad held around the anniversary of the Nazi surrender in 1945. "Our coaching staff told us, 'You're not only here for football, we were very happy to represent Germany.'" Meanwhile, fans of the clubs Avantgarde and Tosno streamed into the stadium. Tosno fan named Andrei Rylikov told The Observer that concerns over monkey chants were overblown. "It's just some of the guys having a bit of fun," he said. "I know people where you are from tend to take everything seriously. It's a different culture, but we don't believe in political correctness like that here." Andrew Roth is the Guardian, Observer Russia correspondent too. stadiums. The fabulous expense of this event has gone to some place other than good architecture. Clockwise from top left, Central Stadium in Ekaterinburg, Samara Arena, Spartak Stadium in Moscow, Mordovia Arena in Saransk. Photograph Getty Images. We should be used to the revolving biennial spectacle of the stadium building binges that accompany global sporting events, Olympics, World Cup, Olympics, World Cup, with the Winter Olympics thrown in for added drama. With some recurring stories, geometrically increasing budgets, the suspenseful fear that they won't be finished on time, picturesque malfunctions, the endless promise of legacy. This time, we are promised, the event won't bequeath rattling, crowd-starved behemoths. Almost always, it does. Russia, where several of the grounds will go on to serve lower league clubs in smallish cities, doesn't seem likely to buck the trend. There tends in these sporting extravaganzas to be a scent of corruption ranging from the faint whiff of distant flatulence to the rank, ripe stench of sharing a Dutch oven with a bean-eating pedoman. Russia, to no one's surprise, is at the latter end of the scale. According to Transparency International, the cost overruns of this year's World Cup, twice the cost per spectator of Brazil in 2014, are at a scale that can only be explained by corruption. To which sorry tales can be added the dark stories that Russia 2018 and Qatar 2022 have brought to prominence for the use of near slaves, from North Korea in Russia's case, to build the stadiums. All of which might make the mere look of these structures seem secondary. But given the money, energy, materials and labor that have gone into them, the fact that they will be landmarks in their cities for decades and that billions will see them on TV, it is not insignificant. There is a limited range of known ways of designing stadiums, as their basic shapes tend to be pushed towards uniformity by consistent and demanding parameters. There is the swooping roof, often hung on wires and masts, as in Frei Otto's tent-like stadium for the 1972 Munich Olympics. There is the backlit cushion of the Allianz Arena, also in the Bavarian capital, home of Bayern Munich and TSV 1860 Munich and venue for the 2006 World Cup. There is the stadium that looks like a portable object, of which Beijing's 2008 Bird's Nest, it is the best known. Russia 2018 is trying most of these approaches. The St. Petersburg Stadium, designed by the late Japanese architect Kisho Kurikawa some time before Russia won its World Cup bid, but which only opened last year after epic delays and cost overruns, goes for the mast-hung roof look. So in somewhat shriveled form do the stadiums in Kaliningrad and Rostov. Kazan's roof swoops but without wires. The Spartak Stadium in Moscow, completed in 2014, and the barely finished Mordovia Arena in Saransk are homages to the Allianz Arena, big cushions with variegated colors. The Fisht Stadium in Sochi, built for the 2014 Winter Olympics and repurposed for football, goes for the portable object conceit. Its architects, Populous, the multinational sports specialists who also designed the stadiums in Kazan, Rostov and Saransk, said it was inspired by a Fabergé egg. Volgograd, overlooked by the 85-meter-high statue that commemorates the Battle of Stalingrad, has a woven basket-like look with hints of the bird's nest. Russia has its own contribution to the styling of stadiums, in the Soviet tradition of building tributes to the space age, flightless saucers at once cosmonautic and massive. The Cosmos Arena for the pleasant southern city of Samara bets heavily on this look, appropriately, arguably, as the city was once a center of the Soviet space program. At the same time, mixed metaphors being permissible in the world of iconic architecture, it is said to look like a flower. It is beyond the scope of this article to tour all 12 venues for the 2018 World Cup, so I may be missing something, but from a distance it doesn't look like being a classic architecturally speaking. There are no game changers, designs that future stadium builders can plunder for inspiration, such as the two Munich venues or Renzo Piano's splendid Bari Stadium for Italian 90, which, it has to be said, never attained a capacity crowd until 2014. Rather, we are offered weary lash-ups in which well-known themes are mixed with a further, oddly widespread, approach to stadium design, the cladding car crash, in which for no apparent reason disparate bits of surface, shape and truss are hurled together. Sochi is one of several venues with this collisional aesthetic. If you truly think it looks like a Fabergé egg, then you have failed to notice something fundamental, exquisite craftsmanship, perhaps, about the original. The stadiums are mostly lumpy, their soaring ambitions grounded, some bearing too obviously the scars of budget cuts, the fabulous expenditure of the 2018 World Cup having gone to some other place than good architecture. The modeled surfaces of the Spartak and Mordovia grounds are more psoriatic than anything else. Nizhny Novgorod has a classic simplicity that puts it a cut above some others, but spoils it with a sort of giant whirlpool-patterned blue and white shower curtain behind its outer colonnade. This is closely inspired, it is alleged, by elements from the Volga countryside. Please. Samara, by the German practice GMP Architekten, is in its appearance the pick of the bunch. It is one of the most troubled in terms of delivery, but it has a mad kitschy oomph, which will inspire affection over time. The Ekaterinburg Arena provokes mixed feelings. Its plain bowl shape is handsome enough, but it deals extraordinarily clumsily, as did the Aquatic Centre at London 2012, with two temporary banks of seating, to be removed after the World Cup is over. It also struggles with the retained fragment of an older building incorporated into the new. The effect is weird but endearing. Almost always, after last-minute panics, the venues for these sporting extravaganzas are just about finished on time. Almost always they are both over budget and flawed in their legacy. Sometimes they throw up an architectural marvel to treasure in times to come. With the possible exception of Samara, the billions of the 2018 World Cup are not going to buy Russia's cities such gems. Rowan Moore, architecture critic, The Observer 3. Protest Pussy Riots. Maria Alyokina, the state controls all the big media but they cannot cut out the eyes of the people. Maria Alyokina, center, and members of Pussy Riot are set upon by police in Sochi, 2014. Photograph. Mori Gash, AP. Maria Alyokina, 29, is a Moscow-based artist, political activist and member of punk provocateurs Pussy Riot. In 2012, she and two other members of Pussy Riot were arrested after a performance in Moscow's Cathedral of Christ the Savior and sentenced to 2 years in prison on a charge of hooliganism motivated by religious hatred. Since her release, she has continued to agitate against the Putin administration, while the fame of Pussy Riot gave her a platform to perform around the world. A record of her experiences can be found in her book Riot Days, Alan Lane. Do you think the government sees the World Cup as an opportunity to present a better image of itself to the world? We were released 2 months before the end of our prison term because of the Sochi Olympics. Of course we went to Sochi, where the Cossacks made their first appearance with whips, so I have no illusions about saving face or making a good impression for the West. You were arrested last month for protesting outside the Moscow headquarters of the FSB, the Internal Security Services. What happened? The FSB blocked the messaging app Telegram in the Russian territory, because Telegram refused to give the keys for reading messages to the security services. We went with paper planes, which is the symbol of Telegram, and started throwing them at the building. We got arrested and spent 48 hours in the cage. For me, that was quite frightening, because when you hear that it's illegal to throw paper planes in your city, it's quite strange. There have been more protests in the past few weeks. There was a huge demonstration on the 30th of April, with 12,000 people supporting Telegram. That was just several days before the inauguration, and before the big protest on the 5th of May, in which I participated as well. This protest was really hard because of the police violence. They tortured people. Some activists and journalists were beaten and are still in hospital. As well as police, there were fascist groups supported by the administration who violently attacked people and were not arrested. They were hand in hand with police. This is just the first days of this fourth presidential term, but it's already the face of it. Has it become more difficult to protest in Russia since you started? After the annexation of Crimea, the language of the state changed a lot. They started to use ultra-Soviet lexicon, calling us enemies of the state and enemies of the people, but I believe that they are enemies of the people because they hire one group of citizens to beat another using money from taxes. They are putting people in jail for protesting more than before. We have political murders such as the murder of physicist and liberal politician Boris Johnson in 2015. Even the face of the system became more brutal. But for me, I've found ways to protest even inside penal colony, inside prison. Also, I'm really happy that when I come to the demonstrations, I see teenagers, I see students. When we were arrested for throwing paper planes, 10 out of 12 were arrested for the first time. They spent their first night at the police station, but they were not scared. And this is what I believe in. Because yes, this state controls all the big media, they provide really terrible propaganda, but they cannot cut out the eyes of people, they cannot cut off the ears of people. People see what is going on and they totally disagree with it. Maria, Masho, Alakina, people see what is going on and they totally disagree with it. Photograph, Joel Saget, AFP, Getty Images. You have spent 2 years in prison and have suffered hardship. Has it affected your desire to protest at all? Now, you mentioned that you were able to protest inside prison. Could you explain that? The Russian prison system is actually post-Gulag. The feel of these prisons is the same. We have labor camps. All the prisoners are made to work and they are paid almost nothing, about $5 per month. There is almost no medicine there, and conditions are really terrible. I went to court against the prison administration. It started a revolution, because they started to put up salaries, some prison guards were fired, and so on. For this world, it's a big change. I believe that every gesture makes a change, a big change to the whole system. So protesting in Russia does have an effect, you think? Of course it does. For some people, it's a question of their lives. What protest methods have you learned are effective? To not lose your sense of humor. In Russia, without it, something bad will happen. Actually, how do you not make fun of a system that is afraid of paper planes? Is the Putin administration genuinely afraid of protesters like you? Well, if they repress people, put people in jail, start to call them enemies of the state, beat them, sometimes kill them, what does it mean? It means they're afraid to lose their position, to lose their options, to steal money till forever. Are you optimistic about the future of Russia? The future is now. And now I'm not crying, so maybe it's good. Interview by Killian Fox 4. Media and censorship, it's only going to get worse. Mediazona's Sergei Smirnov speaks at an opposition rally for democracy, Moscow. Photograph, Alemi, it's only going to get worse, is the hashtag and rallying cry, snappy and monosyllabic in Russian, of Media Zona, an independent, crowd-funded news outlet in Moscow. Journalists in Russia are facing increasing violence, open and unpunished, and there are few legal safeguards for reporters. State censorship and intimidation, both physical and digital, is intensifying, while Western IT giants are doing little to deter the bot and troll infestations targeting independent media outlets. Media Zona is a tiny outfit with a handful of reporters, which focuses on just one topic: Russia's political trials and the manifold abuses inside its justice system. There's no public politics left in Russia, it's just these criminal cases, says its editor-in-chief Sergei Smirnov. Most of Media Zona's content is just straight-up courtroom stenography, minutes of sessions where anti-fascists who have been tortured by security services to extract false confessions are denied bail, or an independent media outlet is fined by the state regulator for embedding on its website a YouTube clip containing a single profane expression. In March 2016, a Media Zona reporter, with a team of other journalists, including 2 foreign ones, was attacked on the border between Chechnya and Ingushetia, 2 republics in the south of Russia with a long history of bloody insurgencies, counterterrorism operations and oppression. Their bus was torched and they were beaten by unknown assailants. Some were badly injured. The investigation is stalling. There have been no arrests or even suspects in the case. Censorship and intimidation comes in many forms, such as denying access to conflict areas. It's next to impossible, for example, for an independent journalist to report from Syria unless he or she is accredited with the Ministry of Defense, sequestered on the Russian military base in Hmyim and writing glowing reports about the heroism of Russian servicemen or puff pieces about buckwheat porridge in the mess hall. Smirnov says Western IT giants also play a role in censorship. Many independent outlets rely on YouTube as a platform for their video content, which gets swarmed immediately after posting with thousands of dislikes. Disliked videos then sink down in ratings, and trolls in the comments. Activists and reporters have complained about this to Google, to little effect. And it's only going to get worse, Smirnov concludes. Alexei Kovalov is managing editor of Kodastory.com, a non-profit news outlet. 5. Nostalgia. Whether Soviet simplicity or the strength of the czars, the best of times are in the past, thanks to Dear Stalin for a happy childhood, reads this 1936 Soviet poster. Photograph, Heritage Images, Getty Images. There's a club in Moscow called Petrovich, which was hugely popular when it opened in 1997, back when Russians were only too glad the Soviet Union was gone. According to the club's website, it was inspired by the ironic nostalgic feeling for the good old Soviet times, and, appropriately enough, it is 5 minutes walk from the Lubyanka, the prison building where the KGB conducted mass interrogations, and a post-Soviet celebration of all things USSR, from cartoons depicted on the restaurant's plates, and music, Yuridino, the theme song from a 1976 children's film, to food, dumplings, and drink bad vodka. Its nostalgia was close to sarcastic. When I went back this year it was exactly the same and yet entirely transformed. Because there was no longer any irony. Now the nostalgia is real, people want the good old Soviet times back. And nylon suits and